Yuri Bezmenov, was a KGB agent for the Soviet Union, and he explains how ideological subversion works. Dr. So brought it up with Joe Rogan.
I know you appreciate all of the craziness that's been happening in academia in terms of I watched Yuri Bezmenov. I know you talk a lot about him and the defector. And I feel like he must be psychic or something, because what he describes in terms of ideological subversion and how to control basically an entire generation by going through academics and teaching them at a young age how to think, what to think more specifically, and how to then get people to a place where they can't agree on what objective reality is. That's essentially what's happening on university campuses.
The Yuri Bezmenov interview from, I think it was 84?
Yeah.
Is so crazy, because back then I'm sure people were like, come on, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
This is not. But if you look at it now in 2023, like, he was telling the truth. He has to have been telling the truth. And that the Soviet Union had planned this out for generations, and that they knew that this was going to be a 10, 20, 30-year project. And it's been successful.
The basic idea here that Dr. So is laying out, that the concept of how to take out a country is not that complex. If you can get a whole bunch of young people, if you can get a generation to think that the founding of the country was evil, that good is bad and bad is good, not to know their gender, all of the stuff that we're constantly talking about, right? That you could basically subvert and destroy a country without ever picking up a weapon. Now, it's interesting. She said maybe he's psychic, which she was kind of joking about, but it's like, it's not that he was psychic. It's not that he could see the future. He understood the methods that the KGB and that the Soviets were using in America and have been using in America now for at least 3-4 decades. Now let's go to Yuri Bezmenov himself and hear a bit more on ideological subversion.
Ideological subversion, that is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism.
It is explaining what has happened in America and what has led us to this very moment right now. This very moment we are starting to wake up to, and a whole bunch of people are now pushing back on. But if you take the basic ideas, like America isn't good, and you teach that to a generation, that the country was founded on racism, and you teach that for a generation or two, that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, and you teach that for a while, that having a penis has nothing to do with being a boy, and you teach that for a while, et cetera, you could see how you'd end up in a place where we would be in this constant state of hysteria that we seem to be in.
Or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins, never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system.